The winter's first sight. It was close to noon when Narelle saw her sister, Kayla, sprinting toward her through the snowy village lanes, her cloak trailing behind her. Kayla was breathless, her face flushed with excitement. "Did you hear?" she gasped. Narelle raised an eyebrow. "Hear what?" Kayla held out a scroll, delivered by her favorite carrier pigeon. "The prince has died." "The prince?" Narelle stammered. "But does that mean the war is over?" Kayla nodded solemnly. For real this time. For years the war had raged, mostly in spirit, after the prince lost his powerful allies to the south. But now, with his death, the conflict was truly ending. Narelle felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. "Does everyone know yet?" Kayla smirked. "Not exactly. I might have intercepted the message. Rebel pigeons are hard to control, you know." Narelle shook her head, chuckling. "You're reckless. So what now?" Kayla's eyes sparkled with something both troubling and exciting. "The new royals are taking over the kingdom, which means they'll need you to fulfill your duty." A few days later, the new Princess Sarah summoned Narelle in private. After the official coronation feast, they stood on a balcony under a clear starlit sky, surrounded by the quiet stillness of a village at peace for the first time in decades. "Narelle," Saris began, her voice wavering just enough for Narelle to notice. "Yes, Your Highness? There is one final task I must ask of you. A duty, you understand," Saris said softly. Her dark, contemplative eyes met Narelle's, revealing layers of unspoken sorrow. "You must carry out a royal execution at dawn." Narelle swallowed the heaviness that came with such a role. "I understand. Will you attend?" Saris hesitated. "Would you want me there?" Narelle wanted to say yes, but knew it would be hard for Saris to watch someone pay with their life for being born under a different reign. She shook her head. "It's all right, I'll be fine." The dawn came colder than expected, and her younger brother Leon had to shake her awake, urging her to get ready. The weight of her responsibility filled her with a mix of dread and duty. By the time she was led to the secluded cell where Princess Talia, the deposed prince's sister, was being held, she'd nearly forgotten the route to the garden. When she opened the door, Narelle was surprised to see a calm, middle-aged woman with graying hair, seated near a table. She looked up with a sad smile. "Hello." Narelle took a steadying breath. "Are you ready?" Princess Talia nodded, standing slowly. "It's strange, but I've waited all my life for this." As they walked through the winding halls toward the front garden, Talia's gaze drifted across the small, frosted windows. "My mother used to tell me stories about the gardens," she murmured. "I never got to see them." Narelle's heart clenched. This was no ordinary prisoner. Talia had grown up in the palace, yes, but confined to a dungeon. She'd only known freedom in stories. "I wish you could have seen them in spring," Narelle said quietly. "It's all right," Talia replied. "I'm glad to see anything at all." Finally, they reached the garden, where dawn's light was just beginning to break. Talia paused, gazing at the snowy expanse with wide eyes, as if she were seeing the world for the first time. She knelt, running her fingers through the snow. "It's beautiful," she whispered as tears filled her eyes. This is what I've dreamed of for 40 years. Don't wait, Narelle. Don't wait as I did." Narelle's heart felt as cold as the snow underfoot as she carried out her duty. She stayed in the garden long after Talia's passing, her thoughts lingering on the simplicity of what Talia had wished for. A glimpse of beauty, too long denied. Later, as she made her way back to the palace, she found Saris waiting. Saris looked at her with concern. "You missed breakfast," she whispered almost tenderly. Narelle managed a small smile. "I just wanted to stay in the garden. The winter, it feels new somehow." Saris laughed softly. "You hate winter." But today Narelle didn't. Inspired by Talia's words, she looked to Saris, an idea taking hold. Would you join me for lunch? Out there? Saris looked at her in surprise, and a touch of warmth colored her cheeks. Yes, I'd like that. With that, Narelle took her hand, savoring the peaceful silence around them. At last, she was ready to see her first true winter. It was nearing the midday break when my sister stumbled into the room, breathless and alight with barely contained excitement. Her thick robes were oversized, the ends trailing dangerously underfoot, but she didn't seem to mind. She struggled for words between gasps, her cheeks flushed. "Lucian," she said, "have you heard the news?" "What news, Rena?" I replied, setting aside the dusty ledger I'd been studying. Her brown and white pigeon, Bramble, settled on her shoulder with a small, indignant squawk, and I took that as my cue to put the ledger down and actually pay attention. "The prince is dead," she whispered, eyes wide. I blinked. "The prince is dead?" Rena nodded with a grin. "He's gone. No more war. The Northlands are finally free." It took me a moment to absorb her words. The conflict had dragged on for 40 years, and while it had slowed to a political stalemate in the past decade, the prince's death meant the end of our kingdom's struggle, the end of years of cautious alliances, skirmishes, and the silent tension that weighed over our homeland. "Does anyone else know?" "No, not yet," she admitted, brushing a hand through her frizzy hair. "I might have intercepted the scroll. Bramble got to it first." I raised an eyebrow at the pigeon, who was busy preening, blissfully unaware of its latest transgression. "You know that's against the law," I murmured, unable to suppress a smile. Rena rolled her eyes. "Oh, you're such a worrywart. Don't you realize what this means?" "Yes," I replied, "the war is over." She grinned. "And that means you're about to meet someone." "Who?" I asked, intrigued. Later that week, as celebrations filled the streets, I was summoned to the royal quarters. Princess Alora, newly crowned by her father's side, was hosting a banquet in honor of her family's ascension. I was assigned to guard the door, blending into the backdrop like the decor. It was after the feast, the sounds of music and celebration echoing faintly through the halls, when the new princess appeared beside me. "Lucian," she greeted me with a nod, her blue eyes sharp and observant. I dropped into a low bow. "Princess Alora." "Enough of that," she said, a slight grin tugging at her lips. "It's strange. This new title. I hardly feel like a princess." She wasn't wrong. There was an ease about her that defied her royal status. She'd been part of the castle, but never apart from it, always lingering on the edges with an easy smile and a quick wit that made her approachable. Her hair was falling out of the elaborate braid she'd worn earlier, and she absent-mindedly tucked a loose strand behind her ear. "Are you adjusting to everything?" I asked. It felt strange to make small talk with the princess, but with Alora, it seemed natural. She gave a small shrug. "In some ways, it's the same as it was before. Just a little heavier now." She paused, her gaze falling on the royal crest embroidered on my shoulder. "Are you still doing the royal executions?" The question caught me off guard, but I nodded. "Yes." She looked down, considering her next words. "There's someone I need you to visit in the dungeon. She's been kept there for many years waiting for." Alora stopped and took a deep breath. "Tomorrow at dawn, we need you to complete your duty." There was an ache in her voice that I couldn't ignore, but I kept my tone professional. "Understood. Will you be there?" Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hesitation. "No," she said softly. "I think it would be too hard to witness." Before dawn, I made my way to the royal dungeons, led by a guard named Tom, who walked in silence beside me. He stopped before a large oak door and gestured for me to go ahead. I opened it, and inside was a dimly lit room with a small bed, a low table, and a candle flickering in the gloom. Sitting quietly on the bed was an older woman, wrapped in a simple cloak, her brown hair streaked with gray. When she looked up, her gaze was both warm and resigned. "Hello," I greeted her awkwardly. She gave a faint smile. "So it's finally time?" I nodded, unsure what to say. "My name is Lucian." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's a good name. My name is Elira." "Elira." I hesitated, wanting to offer some small comfort, but unsure how. "I'm here to take you to the royal gardens." She sighed softly, nodding. I never thought I'd see those gardens. I offered her my arm, which she took tentatively. We walked through the winding halls of the castle in silence, her steps slow and steady beside me. She took in each corner, each shadowed archway with a quiet reverence that tugged at my heart. As we neared the exit to the gardens, I whispered, "Are you sure you're all right?" "Elira's geish met mina." It's strange. I've spent decades waiting for this, but now that I can see the sky, it's like a gift in itself. We stepped out into the garden, and Elira stopped, her eyes widening at the sight of snow blanketing the ground, the dawn casting a pale pink hue over everything. "Snow," she murmured, her voice full of wonder. She bent down, letting the flakes gather in her hands, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It's beautiful." As she marveled at the snow, I took a step back, watching her with a sense of awe. She had endured so much, yet here she was, cherishing this simple sight. It was almost as if she'd found peace at last. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the frost. At last Elira looked up, her face lined with tears. "Lucian, don't wait for life to begin. Don't wait as I did. There is so much beauty in the world, even in places you least expect." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I reached out, gently laying my hand over her heart, and the world went still. Afterwards, I wandered alone in the garden, the snow crunching beneath my feet. I didn't join the others for breakfast. The thought of sitting in that warm hall felt wrong somehow. Instead, I stayed in the quiet, thinking about Elira's words and the way she'd looked at the snow, as if it held all the beauty she'd ever dreamed of. "Lucian." I turned, and there was Elora, standing in the snow with an uncertain look in her eyes. "Princess," I greeted her softly. She stepped closer, her gaze searching mine. "I thought you'd join us this morning." "I needed time. I didn't expect." My voice trailed off, unsure of how to explain it all to her. She tilted her head, giving me a soft smile. "Do you want to take a walk with me? Out here?" A smile tugged at my lips. "I'd like that." We wandered through the garden side by side, our breaths visible in the crisp morning air. The garden was silent, save for the faint chirping of winter birds. And for once, I found myself appreciating the stillness. Elora's hand brushed against mine, and I took it gently, holding on to the warmth that she offered. "Thank you, Lucian," she whispered, her fingers tightening around mine. "For being here. For seeing this with me." As we walked, a strange sense of peace settled over me, and I knew that, in that quiet winter garden, a part of me had finally begun to wake.